In the glittering world of Manhattan's elite, Marcus Thorne was a king, and his annual company Gala was his coronation. This year, he stood with his mistress Isabella on his arm, ready to claim the ultimate prize. His wife Amelia was supposed to be at home, a forgotten, simple woman he'd deemed unworthy of his new life. But he made one fatal mistake. He underestimated the woman he betrayed. While the mistress took the stage to claim their shared victory, the ballroom doors swung open, revealing a wife no one recognized, and a truth that would bring an empire to its knees. The silence in their Upper East Side penthouse was a specific kind of quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, the sound of space that had once been filled with laughter and conversation. Amelia Thorne stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the river of headlights on Fifth Avenue, but her gaze was unfocused. The city lights, once a shared dream, now felt like a million glittering eyes watching her loneliness. Her husband, Marcus Thorne, was a man forged in the crucible of ambition. When she'd met him, he was a brilliant junior analyst with a charmingly crooked smile and dreams that seemed to light up the world around him. Amelia, with her quiet intelligence and unwavering belief in him, had been his anchor. She'd proofread his reports, talked him through nerve-wracking presentations, and celebrated every small victory as if it were her own. She had put her own promising career in corporate law on hold to be the foundation upon which he built his empire. Now he was Marcus Thorne, Executive Vice President of Thorne Industries, the sprawling conglomerate his father, Alistair Thorne, had built from the ground up. The crooked smile had been straightened by expensive orthodontics, and his dreams were no longer shared over takeout on their tiny apartment floor. They were announced in boardrooms and whispered about in the pages of the Wall Street Journal, and in the process the man she loved had become a stranger, replaced by a polished, impeccably tailored effigy who moved through their shared life with the detached efficiency of a CEO managing an underperforming asset. The Thorne Industries annual gala was less than a week away. It was the social and corporate event of the season, a night where fortunes were made and careers were cemented under the grand chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel. For years, Amelia had attended on Marcus's arm, a quiet but proud partner. But this year was different. "You're not seriously thinking of going, are you?" Marcus had asked 2 nights ago, not even looking up from his tablet. He was scrolling through market projections, his brow furrowed in concentration. The question was casual, but the dismissal in his tone was a physical blow. Amelia had been arranging flowers in a vase, a small act of defiance against the sterile modernity of their home. Her hands stilled. "Of course I am. It's the gala, Marcus. I've already been in touch with a stylist." He finally looked up, and his eyes, once warm and full of adoration, were coolly analytical. He scanned her simple linen dress and bare face as if she were a line item he was about to cut from a budget. "Amelia, listen. This year is critical. Dad is about to announce the new global VP position. It's between me and Isabella Ricci. The entire board will be their international investors. It's not a social call. It's the final round of the longest job interview of my life. And I've been by your side for every other round," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. "Why would this be any different?" "Because," he said, sighing with a theatrical impatience that was becoming his default mode. "You don't fit. Not anymore. The wives of the other executives, they play the game. They run charities, they sit on boards, they know how to network. You're wonderful, honey, but your world is here." He gestured vaguely around the silent, opulent apartment. "You wouldn't be comfortable. and frankly, your presence would be a distraction I can't afford. A distraction. That's what she had become. The anchor was now a dead weight. Each word was a carefully chosen dart designed to wound her confidence until she retreated willingly. He was telling her she was not enough, but wrapping it in the language of concern. The name Isabella Ricci hung in the air between them. Isabella was the company's brilliant, beautiful, and utterly ruthless chief of mergers and acquisitions. She was everything Emilia was not, sharp-edged, dressed in Tom Ford, and armed with a smile that could close a billion-dollar deal or cut a rival to shreds. Emilia had seen the way Marcus looked at Isabella in company photos. A spark of shared, ravenous ambition she hadn't seen in his eyes for years, not since he had looked at her that way. "I see," Emilia said, turning back to her flowers, her posture rigid. "So you'll be going alone. It's better this way." For us, he'd said the lie smooth and practiced. He'd already stood up and walked to the bar to pour himself a scotch, the conversation for him already over. Now standing by the window, his words echoed in the empty space. It wasn't just about the gala. It was about the late nights that were no longer explained the scent of a perfume, something expensive and floral like Chanel No. 5 that clung to his suit jackets, and the second phone he thought she didn't know about. It was about the emotional chasm that had opened between them, a vast, silent canyon she could no longer pretend wasn't there. Her phone buzzed on the marble countertop. It was a message from her best friend, Julian Croft, a fiercely talented but still struggling fashion designer. "Did you decide on a concept for the gala dress yet? I have a sketch for that emerald silk we talked about that will make every jaw in the room hit the floor. Call me." Emilia's fingers trembled as she typed a reply. "Change of plans, I'm not going this year." Julian's reply was instantaneous. "What, call me? Now." She ignored the call. She couldn't bring herself to voice the humiliation to say the words out loud. "My husband is ashamed of me. He thinks I'm a liability. Admitting it would make it irrevocably real." Later that evening, Marcus came home humming a tune she didn't recognize. He seemed lighter, energized. He dropped his briefcase by the door and loosened his tie. "Big day," he announced to the room at large. "Isabella and I finally broke through on the Petrocorp merger. It's the deal of the decade. If we land this, the VP position is all but guaranteed." He didn't specify who the "we" referred to. "That's wonderful, Marcus." Emilia said, her voice a perfect imitation of the supportive wife she was supposed to be. He walked over and kissed her on the forehead, a gesture so devoid of passion it felt like a corporate formality. "See, this is what I'm talking about. The pressure is immense. The gala is the final presentation stage. Alistair wants Isabella and me to say a few words about the merger. It's our victory lap. There it was again. The new us." He disappeared into their bedroom to change, leaving his briefcase on the floor. For a moment, Emilia just stared at it. It was a sleek leather vessel of his new life, a life from which she was being systematically excluded. A dark, unfamiliar impulse rose within her. For 10 years she had respected his privacy, his space, his work. She was his trusted partner, but she wasn't that anymore. She was an outsider. With her heart hammering against her ribs, she knelt and clicked open the latches. The interior was organized with his signature precision folders, a laptop, a tablet. But nestled in a side pocket, tucked into a velvet pouch, was a small square box. It was a shade of deep red, so iconic it was instantly recognizable. Cartier. Her breath hitched. Was it for her a peace offering? an apology for his cruelty about the gala. Hope, fragile and foolish, fluttered in her chest. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a necklace. It wasn't a delicate chain or a simple pendant. It was a statement piece, a river of brilliant cut diamonds cascading from a central, impossibly large sapphire that glittered under the dim light like a shard of the midnight sky. It was breathtakingly beautiful. And it was not her. Emilia's style was classic, understated. This was a warrior's jewel, a trophy to be worn by someone who commanded attention, who walked into a room and owned it. It was a necklace for a woman like Isabella Ricci. The hope in her chest died, replaced by an icy certainty that froze her from the Santurutta. This was Isabella's reward for the Petrocorp deal. This was the jewel that would adorn the neck of the woman who stood by her husband's side at the gala, the woman who had taken her place. She gently closed the box, placed it back in the velvet pouch, and secured it in the briefcase, her movements steady and precise. She clicked the latches shut. When she stood up, the reflection that looked back at her from the dark window was not of a heartbroken wife. The tears she expected were not there. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but within them a new light was beginning to dawn. It was the cold, hard glint of resolve. Marcus had called her a distraction. He had deemed her unworthy. He had tried to lock her away in their gilded cage. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. It was Emilia who had taught him how to read a balance sheet. It was Emilia who had stayed up with him for nights on end, helping him research the arcane legal precedents that won him his first major case for the company. He had discarded her, but he had forgotten to take back the knowledge and the strength she had given him. The gala was in 5 days. He thought he had barred the door. He had no idea she was about to build her own. The days leading up to the gala became a masterclass in deception, a silent, brutal war waged within the pristine walls of their apartment. Emilia became an actress, and her performance was flawless. She played the part of the chastened, compliant wife. She agreed that Marcus was right, that the gala was too much pressure, and that she would be much happier at home with a book. She made his favorite meals, asked about his day with a convincing smile, and wished him luck on the final push for the Petrocorp merger. Her compliance seemed to relieve him. He became more relaxed around her, almost magnanimous in his victory. He no longer saw her as a problem to be managed, but as a settled issue, a box that had been ticked. This carelessness was his second mistake. It allowed her the space she needed to uncover the full architecture of his betrayal. The gaslighting had been happening for months, a slow, insidious erosion of her reality. Every suspicion she'd voiced had been turned back on her. Another late night, Marcus Emilia, the deal is at a critical stage. You know that. Why are you trying to make me feel guilty for working hard for us? Who is Isabella, who keeps texting you after 10 p.m.? She's my colleague. We're leading the biggest project of our careers. Do you want me to fail? Your insecurity is becoming a real problem. This shirt smells like perfume. I was in meetings all day. People wear perfume. My God, you're becoming paranoid. Maybe you should talk to someone. He had made her believe that the problem was her, not his behavior. He had painted her as jealous, unstable, and irrational until she had started to question her own sanity. But the sight of that Cartier necklace had been like a lightning strike, illuminating the entire twisted landscape of his lies. Now she saw his tactics for what they were, not a defense, but a deliberate, cruel strategy. Her investigation began with the shared family tablet she hadn't touched in months. He used it for personal browsing, assuming she never looked at it. His search history was a digital diary of his affair. Reservations for two at Daniel, a restaurant he'd always claimed was impossible to get into. Hotel bookings at the Carlisle for nights he was supposedly on a red-eye to Chicago. Receipts from luxury boutiques on Madison Avenue for gifts she had never received. And then there were the photos. Tucked away in a hidden folder in his cloud storage was a collection of pictures of him and Isabella. They were in Paris, a trip he'd claimed was a solo corporate retreat, smiling under the Eiffel Tower. They were on a yacht, the sun glinting off the water, Isabella in a bikini draped over him. In every photo he wore the same expression, the unguarded, joyful smile she hadn't seen directed at her in years. He looked like the man she had fallen in love with, and seeing that man with another woman was a fresh, searing pain that eclipsed everything else. She scrolled through the images, her breath catching in her throat, a wave of nausea washing over her. This wasn't a recent fling. This was a life. A whole parallel life he had been living behind her back. For how long? A year. 2. She thought back, recontextualizing every late night, every business trip, every moment of manufactured anger. The scale of the deception was staggering. The final piece clicked into place when she found the emails. Using a password she had helped him create years ago, the name of their first dog, she accessed his personal account. There, in a neatly organized folder labeled Project Nightingale, was his correspondence with Isabella. It wasn't just romantic, it was a business plan. They weren't just lovers, they were conspirators. They discussed the Petrocorp merger in detail, but they also discussed Alistair Thorne's impending retirement and their strategy for ousting other senior executives. Their plan was to secure the global VP position for Marcus, with Isabella as his second-in-command, effectively giving them total control over the company's future. But one email sent by Isabella to Marcus just 3 weeks ago made Amelia's blood run cold. Subject: The E problem. Marcus: We need to discuss the Amelia situation. Your father is a traditionalist. He values family and loyalty above all. A messy divorce on the eve of the announcement could be catastrophic. It would make you look unstable. He might pass you over. You need to keep her managed and out of sight until after the gala. Once you're named VP, your position will be unassailable. We can handle the fallout then. Give her whatever she wants to go away quietly. But until that promotion is signed, she is your biggest liability. A liability. The same word he had used. It hadn't even been his own. It had been Isabella's. He was a puppet, and Isabella was pulling the strings. The humiliation, the patronizing dismissal. It was all part of a calculated strategy to manage her. Amelia closed the laptop, a terrifying calm settling over her. The grief was still there, a hot, aching core in the center of her chest, but it was now encased in something harder, colder. Rage. Not a hot, screaming rage, but a glacial, focused fury. They thought she was a problem to be managed, a simple domestic creature who could be placated and then discarded. They had analyzed her as a business risk, a variable to be controlled. They had fundamentally misunderstood who she was. She stood up and walked to her closet. Pushing past the rows of tasteful beige and navy blue outfits that Marcus approved of, she reached into the very back. There in a garment bag was the person she used to be. She pulled out a tailored pantsuit, the fabric still crisp. It was from her time at the law firm, a life she had packed away. She had been good at her job. Sharp, analytical, and relentless. Marcus had loved that about her, before he decided he needed a wife who was a soft cushion rather than a whetstone. He had told her she wouldn't fit in at the gala. He was right. The old Amelia wouldn't. The quiet, supportive wife would have been swallowed whole by the sharks in that ballroom. But she had no intention of going as the old Amelia. She picked up her phone and dialed Julian's number. He answered on the first ring. Finally, I was about to send a search party. What is this nonsense about you not going to the gala? Amelia took a deep breath. I am going, Julian, she said, her voice steady and clear. But I need more than a dress. I need armor. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Julian, who knew her better than anyone, could hear the change in her voice. The tremor of hurt was gone, replaced by steel. Armor, he repeated slowly, a grin evident in his tone. My darling Amelia, what kind of war are we starting? The kind you win, she replied. And I need to look like a queen, taking back her throne. Julian Croft's studio in the meat-packing district was a chaotic wonderland of fabrics, sketches, and half-finished creations. It was Amelia's sanctuary, a world away from the cold, minimalist perfection of her penthouse. The moment she stepped inside, the scent of silk and hot tea enveloped her, and Julian was there, pulling her into a fierce hug. All right, he said, stepping back and holding her at arm's length, his sharp eyes taking in the dark circles under hers. Spill it, from the top, and don't leave out a single sordid detail. And so she did. With a cup of steaming jasmine tea warming her hands, she laid out the entire story. The lies, the gaslighting, the other woman, the secret life, and the cold, calculated plan to discard her. She told him about the Cartier necklace and Isabella's email labeling her the E problem. As she spoke, the story transformed from a source of shame into a case file, a set of facts to be analyzed and acted upon. Julian listened without interruption, his expression shifting from sympathy to righteous fury. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, sketching idly on a notepad. So he finally said, his pencil moving with sharp, angry strokes. The plan is not to show up and make a scene. It's not to cry or throw a drink. It's to walk into that room and remind every single person there, especially him and his paramour, of exactly who you are. More than that, Amelia corrected him gently. I'm going to show them who I've become. Julian's eyes lit up. Yes, this is what I'm talking about. Forget the emerald silk. That was for the wife. We need something for the queen. Something that doesn't whisper. Something that roars. For the next 3 days, Julian's studio became their war room. He draped fabrics over her, his hands flying as he pinned and cut. They decided on a color of red so deep it was almost black in the shadows, but that burned like liquid fire in the light. It was the color of blood and wine, the color of vengeance. The design was deceptively simple, a column of silk that clung to her body, with a structured, almost architectural neckline that framed her face and a daringly low back. It was elegant, severe, and utterly commanding. This dress isn't for a man's approval, Julian declared as he worked. This dress is a declaration of independence. While Julian forged her physical armor, Amelia began to work on her own strategy. She knew that simply looking powerful wasn't enough. She needed leverage. She needed a weapon. And she knew exactly where to find it. Her mind went back to the Petrocorp merger. Marcus had called it the deal of the decade. He and Isabella had been working on it for over a year. She remembered the early days when Marcus was still sharing his work with her. He had complained endlessly about the complexities of Petrocorp's South American operations, specifically their drilling sites in Ecuador. There were labyrinthine environmental regulations, land disputes with indigenous communities, and a notoriously corrupt local government. Marcus had dismissed these as soft issues, minor hurdles to be handled by the legal grunts. His focus, and Isabella's, was on the financials. The massive oil reserves, the profit margins, the shareholder value. They saw the world in spreadsheets and stock prices. They were blind to the human and environmental cost, not out of malice, but out of a supreme arrogance that believed such things were irrelevant to the bottom line. Emilia started digging. Using the legal research databases she still had access to from her alumni account, she began pulling every file she could find on Petrocorp's Ecuadorian division. She worked late into the night, long after Marcus had fallen asleep. The glow of her laptop screen, her only companion. She cross-referenced news articles from local Spanish-language papers translated indigenous land claim filings and scrutinized satellite images of the drilling sites. On the third night of her search, she found it. It was a single footnote in an obscure environmental impact report filed with a minor regional agency. The report detailed a recent shift in the local laws, a change enacted just 2 months prior that reclassified the land Petrocorp was operating on. It was no longer just commercial land. It was now designated as protected ancestral territory, following a landmark ruling in favor of the local Shuar people. The legal implications were explosive. According to the new statute, any existing commercial contracts would have to be completely renegotiated, with a minimum of 40% of the profits being redirected to a community trust. Furthermore, any environmental damage, past or present, would be subject to massive retroactive fines under the new, stricter regulations. Marcus and Isabella's entire merger valuation was built on the projected profits from those Ecuadorian oil fields. They were counting on a net value of over $10 billion. This new law didn't just reduce that value. It turned a massive asset into a catastrophic liability. The potential fines alone could run into the billions. Not to mention the public relations nightmare of being seen as exploiting an indigenous community. Their deal wasn't just flawed, it was a time bomb. And they were completely unaware of it, because they hadn't bothered to do the real on-the-ground due diligence. They had read the headlines, not the footnotes. Emilia printed everything. She compiled a dossier, clear, concise, and utterly damning. It included the new legislation, the court rulings, translated testimonies from community leaders, and a revised financial projection showing the multi-billion-dollar black hole in the center of their prized deal. The night before the gala, she sat in her silent living room, the finished dossier on the coffee table in front of her. Julian had delivered the dress which now hung in a garment bag in her guest room, a slash of crimson in the dark. Her transformation was nearly complete. She had the armor. She had the weapon. All that was left was the will to use them. For a moment, a wave of doubt washed over her. She thought of the man Marcus used to be the life they had built. Was she really going to destroy him? Then she thought of Isabella's email, the E-problem, keep her managed. She thought of the Cartier necklace, a prize for her replacement. She thought of the years she had sacrificed, the support she had given, all of it, erased and dismissed as a liability. Her doubt hardened into resolve. This wasn't just about vengeance. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the narrative of her own life. They had written her out of their story. Now she would write the ending. The morning of the gala. Emilia woke before the sunrise. A strange sense of calm had settled over her. The frantic energy of the past few days had receded, leaving behind a quiet, unshakable purpose. She moved through the morning with deliberate grace, making coffee, reading the news, ignoring the palpable thrum of anticipation coming from Marcus's side of the apartment. He was a whirlwind of activity, barking orders into his phone, double-checking his speech, laying out his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He was so consumed by his own impending triumph that he barely registered her presence. To him, she was just part of the furniture. "Wish me luck," he said, pausing at the door before he left for a final prep meeting at the office. He was already wearing his game face, confident, charming, predatory. "You won't need it," Amelia said, her voice even. "You're more prepared than anyone." He smiled, accepting the compliment as his due. "That's right. Tonight, everything changes." He winked at her, a gesture that was meant to be conspiratorial, but felt insulting. "Don't wait up." The moment the door clicked shut behind him, Amelia began her own preparations. There was no stylist, no fuss. Just a methodical, ritualistic transformation. She had booked an appointment at a salon under a different name, a chic, minimalist place in Soho that Julian had recommended. She walked in as Amelia Thorne, the quiet, unassuming wife, with her shoulder-length brown hair and practical no-fuss makeup. She walked out 3 hours later as someone else entirely. Her hair had been cut into a sharp, sophisticated bob that grazed her jawline and dyed a shade of deep sable that made her green eyes look like jewels. Her makeup was striking, but not overwhelming, a smoky eye, a nude lip and skin that seemed to glow from within. Back in the apartment, she laid out the dress. In the light of day, the red silk seemed to have a life of its own. It was more than a garment. It was a statement of intent. As she slipped it on, the fabric felt cool and heavy against her skin, a comforting weight. She looked at herself in the full-length mirror, and for the first time in years, she recognized the woman staring back. It was the woman she had been before Marcus, confident, intelligent, and fiercely independent. The past 10 years had buried her, but she had not disappeared. She accessorized simply. Diamond studs in her ears, her own purchased with her first bonus from the law firm, and a pair of killer heels that made her feel 6 feet tall. No necklace. Her throat was bare. She wanted the space left empty, a silent rebuke to the Cartier diamonds that would be gracing Isabella's neck. The final piece was the dossier. She had condensed the executive summary and key findings onto a single encrypted USB drive small enough to conceal in her clutch. The full printed report was in a sealed envelope addressed to Mr. Alistair Thorne, the Plaza Hotel security. A trusted courier arranged by Julian would deliver it at precisely 9 p.m., 1 hour before the speeches were scheduled to begin. At 7:30 p.m., she was ready. She stood once more by the window looking out at the city. But tonight it didn't look intimidating. It looked like a kingdom. Her kingdom. She had booked a private car to take her to the hotel. As she rode through the glittering streets of Manhattan, she felt no fear, only a profound sense of clarity. She wasn't a woman scorned seeking petty revenge. She was a CEO about to execute a hostile takeover of her own life. She arrived at the plaza and chose not to use the main entrance. Instead, she entered through a side door, leading to the residence, bypassing the red carpet and the throng of photographers. She had no interest in their cameras. Her audience was inside. She took a moment in a quiet alcove, her clutch in her hand, the weight of the small USB drive, a tangible reminder of her purpose. She could hear the muffled sound of the orchestra and the buzz of hundreds of conversations from the grand ballroom down the hall. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she began to walk. The doors to the ballroom were massive ornate sentinels of gilded wood. As she approached, two ushers moved to stop her, their eyes politely questioning, searching for an invitation she did not have. She didn't break her stride. She simply looked at them, her gaze direct and unwavering. "I'm Mrs. Thorne," she said, her voice low and clear. "Please open the doors." There was something in her tone, a quiet authority, so absolute that they didn't question it. They looked at each other for a split second, then as if compelled by an unseen force, they each took a handle and pulled. The doors swung inward, and the wall of sound and light hit her. The grand ballroom was a sea of black ties and glittering gowns, a universe of power and influence. And as Amelia paused on the threshold framed by the doorway, a hush began to fall. It started at the back of the room and spread like a wave, a ripple of silence moving through the crowd as heads turned one by one. Conversations faltered. Glasses were lowered. The orchestra's melody seemed to thin and then fade away into nothing. In the space of 10 seconds, the entire room, 500 of the most powerful people in New York, had fallen completely silent. Every eye was on her. Across the vast expanse of the ballroom, she saw him. Marcus was standing near the stage, a glass of champagne in his hand, Isabella Ricci beside him. Isabella was radiant in a silver-sequined gown, the Cartier diamond and sapphire necklace blazing at her throat. They were laughing at something someone had said, the very picture of a power couple. Then Marcus felt the shift in the room. His smile wavered, and he turned his head, following the gaze of the crowd. His eyes found Amelia. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the polished marble floor. The sound echoed in the cavernous silence. His face went white, a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He stared at her as if he were seeing a ghost, a beautiful, terrifying ghost in a blood-red dress. Isabella, annoyed by the interruption, turned to see what had caused the commotion. Her practiced smile froze on her lips, her eyes widening in disbelief before narrowing into slits of pure venom. The necklace, her trophy, suddenly seemed garish and desperate. Amelia held their gazes for a beat longer. She had their attention. She had everyone's attention. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace, she began to walk into the room. Her heels clicked against the marble, the only sound in the dead silence. It was not the walk of a wife. It was the entrance of a queen. The walk across the ballroom floor felt like a mile. With every step, Amelia could feel the weight of 500 pairs of eyes on her, a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and sheer astonishment. Whispers started to erupt like brush fires in the silence. "Who is that?" "That's Amelia Thorne, Marcus's wife." "I don't believe it." "What is she doing here? I heard they were separated." She ignored them all. Her focus was laser-sharp, fixed on the stage at the far end of the room, and the two figures standing beside it, frozen in a tableau of disbelief. Marcus looked like he had been struck by lightning, his mouth slightly agape, his skin pale and clammy. Isabella had recovered more quickly. Her shock had morphed into a mask of icy fury. If looks could kill, Amelia would have been incinerated on the spot. Amelia didn't approach them directly. That would be too simple, too much like a domestic squabble. Instead, she changed her trajectory, moving towards the side of the room, where a formidable silver-haired man was standing, watching the entire scene with shrewd, intelligent eyes. Alistair Thorne, the patriarch of the family and the undisputed king of this empire. He was a man who valued control and order above all else. An unexpected disruption at his gala would be infuriating to him. Emilia was counting on it. As she approached, Alistair's expression was unreadable, a mixture of surprise and stern disapproval. He had always been civil to Emilia, but in a distant, formal way. He saw her, she knew, as little more than a necessary but unremarkable accessory for his ambitious son. "Emilia," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is unexpected." "Alistair," she replied, her tone respectful but firm. She met his gaze without flinching. "I apologize for the unorthodox entrance. There's a matter of urgent corporate importance that I needed to bring to your attention personally." His eyebrows shot up. "Corporate importance? My dear, this is a party, not a board meeting." "Sometimes the two overlap," she said smoothly. "A courier delivered a package to your security team at 9 p.m. I would urge you to review its contents at your earliest convenience. It pertains to the Petrocorp merger." Alistair's eyes narrowed. He was a man who could smell risk from a mile away. The seriousness in her voice, the utter lack of hysteria, had put him on high alert. He gave a curt nod, his gaze flicking over towards his son, who was now desperately trying to regain his composure. At that moment, the event's master of ceremonies, seeing the prolonged and awkward silence, decided to reclaim control of the evening. His booming voice filled the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, a little unexpected excitement to keep us on our toes. And now for the moment we've all been waiting for. It gives me great pleasure to introduce two of Thorn Industries' brightest minds who have spearheaded a deal that will redefine our company for the next century. Please welcome to the stage the architects of the Petrocorp merger, Isabella Ricci and Marcus Thorn." A polite but slightly hesitant round of applause filled the room. The spell was broken. Marcus, jolted back to life by the announcement, shot Emilia a look of pure panic before plastering a shaky smile on his face and gesturing for Isabella to precede him towards the stage. Isabella ascended the steps with a predatory grace. She was a performer, and this was her stage. She straightened her shoulders, the Cartier necklace glittering under the spotlights like a weapon. She was going to seize back the narrative, to erase Emilia's disruptive entrance with the force of her own charisma. She stepped up to the podium, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, deliberately ignoring Emilia. "Thank you," she began, her voice smooth as silk, radiating confidence. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating another successful year. We are celebrating the dawn of a new era for Thorn Industries." She was brilliant. Emilia had to give her that. She spoke with passion and precision, outlining the strategic advantages of the Petrocorp acquisition. She painted a vivid picture of market dominance, of unprecedented growth, of a future where Thorn Industries was not just a player, but the undisputed leader in the global energy sector. The crowd was captivated. The whispers about Emilia's appearance died down, replaced by murmurs of approval. "This monumental achievement," Isabella continued, her voice swelling, "was not the work of one person. It required a team with vision, courage, and a relentless drive for excellence. It required a partner who was not afraid to take risks, to challenge conventions, and to work tirelessly towards a shared goal." She turned and smiled at Marcus, who was standing a few feet behind her, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Marcus Thorn is that partner. His support and leadership were instrumental every step of the way." The phrasing was clever. His support. She positioned him as her second, the helpful assistant to her visionary leadership. She was claiming the victory and the VP role as her own right here in front of everyone. In a different context, Emilia might have felt a flicker of satisfaction at seeing Marcus subtly undermined. Isabella's speech reached its crescendo. The Petrocorp deal isn't just a contract, it's a promise of a stronger, more profitable, and more powerful future for every single person in this room. Thank you. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. The disruption was forgotten. Isabella was triumphant. She had won. She stood there basking in the adoration of the crowd, the diamonds on her neck flashing like victory fireworks. She glanced towards Emilia, a small, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. It was a clear final dismissal. You lost. The MC stepped back to the microphone. Incredible thank you, Isabella Ricci. And now a few words from her partner in this historic success, Marcus Thorne. Marcus walked to the podium, looking rattled. Isabella had just taken 90% of the credit for their shared project, and his wife, who was supposed to be at home, was standing in the audience, looking like a spectre at the feast. He cleared his throat, shuffling his notes. He was supposed to build on Isabella's momentum to seal their joint victory. But before he could utter a single word, Emilia began to move. She didn't run or shout. She simply walked from her position at the side of the room towards the small set of stairs at the front of the stage, her expression serene, her purpose clear. The crowd, sensing another shift in the drama, quieted once more. Marcus saw her coming. His eyes widened in terror. Emilia, what are you doing? He hissed, his voice just loud enough to be caught by the microphone. A faint, desperate plea that echoed through the ballroom. She didn't answer him. She reached the stairs, ascended them with a regal calm, and walked directly towards the center of the stage. She stopped beside the podium, taking the second microphone from its stand. She stood there side by side with her husband's mistress, the betrayed wife and the triumphant lover, both bathed in the unforgiving glare of the spotlight. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Isabella's smirk was gone, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief and rage. Marcus looked like he was about to faint. Emilia leaned towards the microphone. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it was so clear and steady that it carried to the farthest corner of the vast room. "Good evening," she said. "My name is Emilia Thorne, and I have a few notes on the presentation." The silence that followed Emilia's opening line was not just an absence of noise. It was a living entity, thick with tension and anticipation. Every person in the grand ballroom was holding their breath, waiting for the explosion. They expected tears, accusations, a messy public airing of a domestic dispute. It was the kind of delicious high society scandal they secretly craved. Emilia gave them none of it. She stood at the podium, a picture of composure, the crimson of her dress, a stark contrast to Isabella's shimmering silver. She was not a hysterical wife. She was an executive about to deliver a correction. Ms. Ricci's presentation was compelling. Emilia began, her voice calm and measured as she turned slightly to acknowledge Isabella. The use of the formal Ms. Ricci was a deliberate surgical strike. It stripped away the intimacy and recast Isabella as a mere professional colleague. Her passion is undeniable. However, in their relentless drive for excellence, it appears she and my husband have overlooked a critical piece of due diligence. A piece that doesn't just alter the valuation of the Petrocorp merger, but in fact turns it into one of the most catastrophic liabilities Thorne Industries has ever faced. A collective gasp went through the audience. This was not about an affair. This was about money. Billions of dollars of it. The mood shifted instantly from salacious curiosity to cold, hard fear. Investors gripped their wine glasses, their faces paling. Board members leaned forward in their seats. Marcus finally found his voice. "Emilia, stop this," he pleaded, stepping toward her. "You don't know what you're talking about." "On the contrary, Marcus," she replied, not even glancing at him. Her focus was on the audience, on the powerful men and women whose fortunes were tied to the company. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Ecuador, specifically Petrocorp's operations in the Sucumbíos province." She saw a flicker of recognition in Alistair Thorne's eyes. He was already connecting the dots. "While you and Miss Ricci were focused on the top-line revenue from those oil fields," Emilia continued, her voice gaining strength, "you seem to have missed the ruling of the Ecuadorian Constitutional Court on May 17th of this year. The ruling in the case of Shuar Nation vs. the Ministry of Energy fundamentally reclassified 2.5 million acres of land, including the land on which Petrocorp's primary drilling sites are located, as protected ancestral territory." She paused, letting the weight of that information sink in. She could see the confusion on the faces of the executives. This was obscure, foreign legal detail. "What does this mean in practical terms?" she asked, her tone becoming that of a lecturer. "It means two things. First, under the new Indigenous Rights Act, any existing commercial contracts on this land are subject to renegotiation with a mandatory 40% profit-sharing agreement, payable to the Shuar Community Trust." A wave of audible shocks and curses swept through the room. The $10 billion asset had just had $4 billion wiped from its value. Isabella finally broke her stunned silence. That's a lie," she stammered, grabbing the podium for support. "Our legal team vetted everything." "That would have been flagged, would it?" Emilia countered, her voice turning sharp. "Did your $500 an hour New York lawyers read the footnotes in reports from a regional environmental agency? Did they translate the court filings that were only published in the local Spanish dialect? Or did they just read the English language summaries provided by Petrocorp's own internal team? The same team that had every reason to hide this inconvenient truth until the ink on your deal was dry." She didn't need an answer. The panicked look exchanged between Marcus and Isabella was answer enough. They had been played, and their arrogance had made them easy marks. "But it gets worse," Emilia said, her voice dropping, drawing the audience in closer. "The second implication of the ruling is the retroactive environmental liability. The new law allows for fines to be levied for all environmental damages incurred since the start of operations. Given Petrocorp's well-documented history of oil spills and deforestation in the region, my conservative estimate based on the fine per hectare schedule outlined in the statute places the immediate liability at approximately $6 billion. The room erupted. People were standing up, shouting questions. The $10 billion asset was now a $10 billion liability. The deal of the decade had become the poison pill of the century. Emilia raised her hand for silence, and miraculously, she got it. This information, including the relevant statute's court documents and a revised financial projection, was delivered to your chairman, Mr. Alistair Thorne, an hour ago, she announced. "I've also taken the liberty of putting the executive summary onto a drive." She held up the small USB stick from her clutch. "For your convenience." She then turned for the first time to look directly at Marcus. The man she had loved, the man she had built, was staring at her with a look of utter devastation. He wasn't just ruined, he was annihilated, and he knew in that moment that she had done it. Her gaze shifted to Isabella. The triumphant queen of the Gala was now just a woman in a silver dress, her face a mask of horror, her career and reputation evaporating under the hot glare of the spotlights. Emilia's voice softened, but lost none of its power. It became personal, intimate, yet every word was a sahurhund, was a dagger meant for the entire room to hear. This deal was built on a lie of omission, she said, her eyes locked on Isabella. A dangerous, expensive lie, born of arrogance and greed. But that seems to be a recurring theme tonight. Her gaze drifted down to the glittering Cartier necklace. A beautiful piece, diamonds and a sapphire. A trophy, I imagine. A prize for a job well done. Isabella instinctively raised a hand to her throat, as if to hide it. But like the merger, it was meant to celebrate. Emilia concluded, her voice ringing with a final devastating clarity. It is built on a foundation of deceit, and anything built on such a foundation will eventually collapse. She placed the microphone carefully back on its stand. She didn't look at Marcus or Isabella again. She turned her back on them, on the stage, on the life they had tried to steal from her. In absolute silence, she descended the stairs. The crowd parted for her as she walked, a sea of stunned faces turning to watch her go. She reached Alistair Thorne, who was standing rigid, his face like a thundercloud. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a glimmer of respect in his eyes. He didn't speak. He just gave her a single, sharp nod. It was all the confirmation she needed. Emilia continued her walk, her head held high, her steps even and unhurried. She walked through the parted crowd, across the marble floor, and towards the grand gilded doors. She didn't look back. She pushed the doors open and stepped out into the hallway, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 careers, 1 multi-billion-dollar deal, and a life that no longer belonged to her. The doors swung shut behind her, cutting off the explosion of chaos that erupted in the ballroom. The war was over, and she had won. The Gala's implosion was immediate and spectacular. By morning, the financial world was ablaze with the story of Thorne Industries' averted catastrophe, and Emilia's name was on the lips of every analyst and news anchor. She was the brilliant, mysterious woman who had saved the company from itself. Ignoring the media frenzy, Emilia disappeared from the public eye, finding sanctuary away from the chaos. The consequences for Marcus and Isabella were brutal and swift. Acting with surgical precision, Alistair Thorne convened an emergency board meeting at dawn. Before the stock market opened, a press release announced the termination of the Petrocorp merger. Marcus Thorne and Isabella Ricci were fired for gross negligence, their careers publicly and irrevocably shattered. Isabella vanished. Marcus, disgraced, desperately tried to contact Emilia with a barrage of voicemails, swinging between remorse and rage. She deleted them all unheard and filed for divorce the next day. Her request was simple. She wanted nothing from their life together, but her freedom. In the following months, Emilia rebuilt. She secured a business loan, silently co-signed by a grateful Alistair, and opened a boutique consulting firm, Thorne Strategic Advisors. Specializing in ethical risk and corporate governance, her firm was an instant success. Poetically, her first client was Thorne Industries, who hired her to audit their international projects, paying her handsomely to prevent the very kind of disaster she had exposed. 6 months after the gala, Emilia was walking through Central Park. Her new life was her own, defined by a peaceful apartment in the West Village and work that gave her purpose. As she passed the Bethesda Terrace, she saw him. Marcus was sitting on a bench, a ghost of the man he once was. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by worn clothes. The arrogant confidence had been hollowed out, leaving behind only exhaustion. He looked up, and their eyes met. He didn't approach, but Emilia found herself walking toward him, compelled to close the final chapter. She stood before him, calm and confident. "Marcus," she said, her voice even. "Emilia," he rasped. "You look good." "I am good," she replied, the words a simple, profound truth. A heavy silence hung between them, filled with the ghosts of their shared past. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered, looking down at his hands. "For everything. I was a fool. I lost everything that mattered because I was chasing things that didn't." Emilia listened, not for him, but for herself. The apology was the final stone falling into place. "Yes, you were," she agreed, her tone devoid of malice. "But people can rebuild, Marcus, from ashes. I did." She looked at the man on the bench one last time, a stranger who wore a familiar face. There was no anger left, only a quiet sense of finality. "Goodbye, Marcus," she said softly. With that, she turned and walked away, into the autumn sunlight, not looking back. She was walking toward her future, a future built not from the ruins of his life, but from the enduring strength of her own. Emilia Thorne's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to the strength that can be forged in the fires of betrayal. She walked into that gala as a wife who had been dismissed and underestimated, and walked out as the master of her own destiny. By refusing to be a victim, and instead using her intelligence and integrity as her weapons, she not only reclaimed her own life, but also exposed the corrupt foundation of the world that had cast her aside. Her journey reminds us that true power isn't about the name you carry or the wealth you possess, but about the unwavering strength of your own character and the courage to demand the respect you deserve. What did you think of Emilia's incredible transformation? Could you have done what she did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. The torrential downpour outside was nothing compared to the storm raging inside the Sterling mansion. One moment, Isabella Sterling was cradling her stomach, dreaming of the nursery she'd designed. The next, she was staring at a set of glossy photographs her husband Nathaniel had just thrown on the marble coffee table. They showed her in a seemingly compromising position with a man she'd never met. It was a lie, a cruel, impossible lie, and yet the venom in her mother-in-law's eyes and the chilling emptiness in her husband's confirmed her fate. Before she could even process the betrayal, the heavy oak doors of the life she knew were slammed shut behind her, leaving her pregnant, penniless, and alone in the unforgiving night. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot about the one man more powerful than all of them, her billionaire father-in-law, Richard Sterling. And he was about to find out everything. The air in the grand drawing room of the Sterling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was thick with the scent of lilies and betrayal. The lilies, funereal and white, were Genevieve Sterling's favorite. The betrayal was a new addition to the decor. Isabella Rossi Sterling stood on the Aubusson carpet, the plush wool a cruel mockery of comfort beneath her trembling feet. The silk of her maternity blouse, once a soft caress, now felt like a shroud. Her hand instinctively went to the gentle curve of her belly, a silent promise to the tiny life within, that she would protect them, even as her own world was being systematically demolished. Across from her, her husband of 2 years, Nathaniel Sterling, wouldn't meet her gaze. His handsome face, usually so quick to smile, was a mask of strained indifference. His attention was fixed on the damning photographs scattered across the polished surface of a Louis XV coffee table. They were expertly crafted forgeries showing Isabella in an intimate cafe setting with a man whose face was artfully obscured, his hand resting on hers. A private moment that never happened. A lie spun from pixels and malice. The architect of this destruction, Genevieve Sterling, stood beside her son, a vision in Chanel tweed and icy condescension. Her silver hair was coiffed into a perfect helmet, unyielding and severe, much like the woman herself. Her eyes the same cold grey as a winter sky raked over Isabella with undisguised contempt. "I knew it from the start." Genevieve began, her voice a low, cultured hiss that cut deeper than any shout. "I told you, Nathaniel. Blood will always out. You can't turn a little museum curator from Brooklyn into a Sterling. She has no breeding, no integrity." "Genevieve, please," Isabella whispered, her voice cracking. "Nathaniel, look at me. You know me. This isn't real. Someone did this to us." Nathaniel finally lifted his head. The conflict in his eyes was agonizing to watch. He was a man caught between the woman he professed to love and the mother whose approval he had craved his entire life. But weakness, Isabella was learning, was a far more corrosive acid than outright evil. "They are dated, Bella," he said, his voice hollow. "From last month, while I was in Singapore. My mother's investigator has phone records too. A man named... It doesn't matter. How could you? There is no man." Isabella's voice rose, laced with a desperation that only seemed to confirm her guilt in their eyes. "I was at the Met planning the new exhibit. I was attending prenatal appointments. I was here waiting for you. This is a lie." Genevieve let out a delicate, theatrical scoff. "Oh, the drama. And to think you're carrying a child. Are you even certain it's Nathaniel's, or does it belong to your accomplice?" The accusation struck Isabella with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She looked at Nathaniel, pleading with her eyes for him to defend her, to defend their child. He just shook his head, a gesture of pathetic surrender. In that moment, the love she thought they shared evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard stone of realization in her gut. He was not her partner. He was his mother's son. "I want her out of my house," Genevieve declared, turning to Nathaniel as if Isabella were no longer in the room. "Now, with nothing but the clothes on her back. We will have our lawyers draft a quiet annulment, citing irreconcilable differences. We'll be generous, of course, provided she signs a non-disclosure agreement and disappears." "Wait," Isabella stammered, her mind racing. "My things, my purse, my phone." Genevieve smiled, a tight, cruel stretching of her lips. "Your privileges have been revoked. The Sterling legal team will handle the disposition of your effects. You will be escorted from the premises." She pressed a small, discreet button on the wall. Within seconds, 2 burly security guards in dark suits entered the room, their faces impassive. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Isabella's shock. "Nathaniel, don't let her do this. This is our home. This is our baby." He flinched at the word baby, the only flicker of humanity he'd shown. But it was fleeting. He looked away toward the rain-lashed windows. "It's for the best, Bella. My mother, she knows what's right for the family." "The family?" Isabella's voice dripped with a sudden icy calm. The desperation was gone, replaced by a clarity born of absolute betrayal. "Or the Sterling brand, the Sterling fortune." The guards flanking her now gently took her arms. The touch was professional, but it felt like a violation. She didn't resist. She walked with a dignity she didn't know she possessed, her head held high. As they passed Nathaniel, she stopped and looked directly at him, forcing him to meet her gaze one last time. "I will never forget this, Nathaniel," she said, her voice low and steady. "And one day you will have to explain to your child why you let your mother throw their pregnant mother out into a storm based on a lie." He had no response. He just stood there, a hollow man in a gilded cage. The heavy front doors swung open, revealing a night ripped apart by wind and rain. The manicured lawns of the estate were shrouded in a churning darkness. One of the guards held an umbrella, a perfunctory gesture of courtesy that was almost insulting. He walked her down the sweeping stone steps to the edge of the long, winding driveway. "A car will be here in 5 minutes to take you to a hotel for the night," he said gruffly, clearly uncomfortable. Isabella shook her head. She knew what that meant. A hotel chosen by Genevieve. A gilded prison where she would be watched, managed, and forced to sign away her life. "No, thank you," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "I'll find my own way." Before the guard could protest, she turned and started walking. The rain immediately plastered her silk blouse to her skin, the cold seeping into her bones. The wind tore at her hair, whipping it across her face. Each step down the long private road, away from the mocking lights of the mansion, was an act of sheer will. She had no phone, no wallet, no plan. All she had was the fierce, primal instinct to protect the life growing inside her, and a burning, righteous anger that was quickly becoming the only thing keeping her warm. The gates of the Sterling estate loomed ahead, a black iron portcullis marking the border between a life of luxurious lies and a future of terrifying unknown truth. And as she passed through them, a sob finally escaped her lips, lost in the howling of the wind. She was free, but she had never felt more alone. The walk from the Sterling estate to the main road felt like a pilgrimage through purgatory. Each squelch of her soaked designer flats on the asphalt was a reminder of the life she had just lost. The manicured hedges and ancient oak trees that lined the private drive, once symbols of sanctuary and permanence, now seemed like silent, judgmental sentinels. By the time Isabella reached the main road, she was drenched, shivering, and utterly disoriented. The passing headlights of cars cut through the deluge, illuminating her for a brief, startling moment, a ghost of a woman in a ruined silk blouse standing on the edge of nowhere. For a terrifying hour, she walked her mind a maelstrom of shock and grief. The initial adrenaline had worn off, leaving a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the rain. How could Nathaniel believe it? How could the man who had whispered promises of forever in her ear just last week now look at her with such cold suspicion? And Genevieve. Isabella had always known her mother-in-law was difficult, that she saw Isabella as an inadequate addition to her perfect dynasty. But she had never imagined this level of calculated cruelty. To fabricate evidence to poison her own son's mind, to cast out his pregnant wife without a shred of compassion. It was monstrous. Her feet were raw, her body ached, but one thought propelled her forward. Chloe. Chloe Davis was her opposite in almost every way. Where Isabella was thoughtful and measured, Chloe was a firecracker of righteous indignation and fierce loyalty. A tenacious journalist for an online investigative news outlet, Chloe lived in a cramped but vibrant fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria, Queens, a universe away from the sterile opulence of Greenwich. They had been friends since their scholarship days at Columbia, a bond forged over late-night study sessions and cheap pizza. Hitching a ride was out of the question. Flagging down a taxi without a penny to her name was impossible. Her only hope was the train station a few miles away. She remembered seeing it once on a drive with Nathaniel. She focused on the memory, using it as a beacon. When she finally stumbled onto the platform, she must have looked like a wraith. A sympathetic station agent, a kind-faced woman named Martha, saw her shivering form and took pity on her. "Honey, are you all right? You look like you've been through a war." Isabella, her teeth chattering, could barely form the words. I was robbed. They took everything. My purse, my phone. I just need to get to Astoria." It wasn't a complete lie. She had been robbed, just not in the way the woman imagined. Martha's expression softened. She looked at Isabella's belly, then back at her pale, rain-streaked face. Without a word, she slid a ticket through the window. "On the house," she said quietly. "You go get yourself somewhere warm and safe." The simple act of kindness was so overwhelming that Isabella burst into tears, mumbling her thanks, before hurrying onto the waiting train. The warmth of the carriage was a blessing. She huddled in a corner seat, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to become invisible as the train rattled its way toward the city. It was past midnight when she finally stood outside Chloe's apartment building. She pressed the buzzer for 4B, praying her friend was home. A moment later, a crackly voice answered. "Yeah, who is it?" "Chloe, it's me. It's Isabella." The silence on the other end was heavy with confusion. "Bella, what's wrong? You sound awful. Can you just let me in? Please." The lock buzzed immediately. Isabella pushed the heavy door open and began the slow, arduous climb up 4 flights of stairs. Each step was a monumental effort. When she reached the landing, Chloe's door was already open. Her friend stood there in faded sweatpants and an old t-shirt. Her usually sharp features clouded with worry. The sight of Chloe's familiar, concerned face was the final crack in Isabella's crumbling composure. A choked sob escaped her, and she practically fell into her friend's arms. "Whoa, Bella. Hey, you're okay. I've got at you," Chloe murmured, guiding her inside and shutting the door against the world. She led Isabella to the worn, comfortable sofa, wrapped her in a thick fleece blanket, and immediately put a kettle on the stove. "Talk to me," Chloe said, her journalist's instincts kicking in, but tempered with deep affection. "What the hell happened? Where's Nathaniel? You're soaking wet and freezing." Between shivering fits and ragged breaths, Isabella told her everything. The setup, the faked photographs, Genevieve's venomous accusations, Nathaniel's spineless betrayal, being thrown out into the storm with nothing. Chloe listened, her expression hardening from concern to disbelief, and then to pure, unadulterated rage. "That absolute witch!" Chloe seethed, pacing the small living rooms like a caged tigress. "And Nathaniel, that gutless, silver-spooned coward. I swear to God. Bella, I will end them. I will write an exposé that will strip the paint from their multi-million-dollar walls." "It's not about revenge right now, Chloe," Isabella whispered, sipping the hot tea Chloe had pressed into her hands. The warmth was slowly chasing the chill from her body. "I don't know what to do. I have nothing. They control everything. The accounts were all joint, but I never had direct access. They'll paint me as an unhinged, cheating gold digger." Chloe stopped pacing and knelt in front of Isabella, her eyes blazing with determination. "No, we're not going to let that happen. First things first, you are safe here. This is your home now, for as long as you need it. Tomorrow we get you to a doctor to make sure you and the baby are okay. Then we start fighting back." She took Isabella's hands. "You are not the timid little mouse Genevieve thinks you are. You are one of the smartest women I know. You're strong, and you're a mother now. They didn't just kick you out, Bella. They declared war on your child. And they have no idea who they're messing with." For the first time all night, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within Isabella. Huddled in Chloe's tiny, cluttered, book-filled apartment, wrapped in a second-hand blanket, she felt more secure than she ever had in the cold, cavernous rooms of the Sterling mansion. The gilded cage had shattered, but here in this haven built on genuine friendship, she could start to gather the pieces. The fight wouldn't be easy, but she wouldn't be fighting it alone. And she was fighting for more than just herself now. She was fighting for the small, innocent life that depended entirely on her. The storm outside was beginning to subside. The storm inside Isabella, however, was just starting to gather its strength. Thousands of miles away in the penthouse suite of the Park Hyatt Tokyo, Richard Sterling closed a deal worth 9 figures with a brisk handshake and a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. At 65, Richard was a titan of industry, the architect of the Sterling global logistics empire. He was a man of cold logic, ruthless efficiency, and immense understated power. He moved through the world with the quiet confidence of a man who owned most of it. His personal life was something he'd largely outsourced to his wife, Genevieve. He provided the vast resources, and she curated their social standing, managed the households, and raised their son. He trusted her judgment in these matters implicitly, not out of deep emotional connection, but out of a CEO's faith in a long-serving, reliable department head. He'd met Isabella a handful of times. She was pretty quiet and seemed to make Nathaniel happy. Richard didn't deal in happiness. He dealt in assets and liabilities. Isabella seemed like a neutral asset. She didn't come from money or influence, which was a minor liability in Genevieve's eyes, but she was educated and discreet, which Richard appreciated. He had bigger things to worry about than his son's domestic arrangements. The call from Genevieve came as he was overlooking the glittering expanse of Tokyo. Her voice was strained, crafted to sound mournful. "Richard, something dreadful has happened," she said. "It's Isabella." He listened without interruption as she spun her carefully edited tale. Isabella had been unfaithful. There was irrefutable proof. A terrible, sordid affair. Nathaniel was devastated, of course. For the good of the family, to avoid a scandal, they had to act quickly. Isabella had been sent away with a generous settlement offer, pending to handle things quietly. Richard felt a stab of annoyance. Not at Isabella's supposed infidelity. He was too pragmatic to be shocked by such things, but at the messiness of it all. "Did you handle it cleanly?" He asked, his tone all business. "No chance of this hitting the press." "Of course, darling," Genevieve assured him. "I have it all under control. I'm focusing on helping Nathaniel through this difficult time." "Good," Richard said, already dismissing it. "I'll be back in 2 days. Keep it quiet." He hung up and turned his attention back to his quarterly reports. The matter, as far as he was concerned, was closed. But 24 hours later, another message arrived. It wasn't a call or an official email. It was an encrypted text message to his private unlisted phone, a number known to only 5 people in the world. The sender was anonymous. The message was short and chillingly direct. They lied. "She is pregnant with your grandchild. They threw her out in a storm with nothing. Ask your head of household staff, Mrs. Davies." She saw everything. Richard Sterling stared at the message, his blood running cold. Pregnant. The word seemed to hang in the air, changing the entire equation. An affair was a messy inconvenience. A pregnant daughter-in-law cast out into the street was a different matter entirely. It was a matter of legacy, of blood. He dismissed the possibility of a prank. No one had this number. This was a calculated move. And it had worked. A seed of doubt, hard and sharp, was planted in his mind. He trusted Genevieve's management of their social lives, but he had never mistaken her for a sentimentalist. Her ambition for the Sterling name was a cold, hard thing. Was it cold enough to do this? His next call was not to Genevieve or Nathaniel. It was to Alistair Finch, the head of his personal security detail for 30 years. Finch was a former MI6 agent, a man of absolute discretion and formidable capability. "Alistair," Richard said, his voice low and devoid of emotion, "I have a delicate and urgent matter. I need you to conduct a quiet investigation at the Greenwich estate. I want you to speak with the head housekeeper, Eleanor Davies. Discreetly. I want to know the exact circumstances under which my daughter-in-law Isabella left the property 2 nights ago. I want to know her current whereabouts, and most importantly, I need you to verify something for me. I need to know if she is pregnant." "Consider it done, Mr. Sterling," Finch replied, his voice a calm, professional baritone. There was no surprise, no questions, just execution. The second call was to his legal team. "Pull every document related to Nathaniel's prenuptial agreement with Isabella Rossi," he commanded. "And I want a full independent audit of every expense Genevieve has charged to the household accounts for the last 6 months. I want it on my desk by the time I land." For the rest of the day, Richard went through the motions of his business meetings, but his mind was elsewhere. He was replaying his brief interactions with Isabella. She had always seemed genuine, a little intimidated by their world, perhaps, but her eyes were clear and direct. He remembered her excitement when talking about a medieval art exhibit she was helping to curate. It was a passion that couldn't be faked. He compared that image with the venom in Genevieve's voice over the phone. A discrepancy. Richard Sterling had built his empire by noticing and exploiting discrepancies. The flight back to New York on his private Gulfstream was tense. He didn't sleep. He stared out of the window at the endless carpet of clouds below, a silent fury building within him. If this was true, it wasn't just a family squabble. It was a profound betrayal of his own code. The Sterlings did not prey on the weak. They did not harm women and children. They were predators in the boardroom, yes, but they were supposed to be patricians in their own home. Genevieve's obsession with social status had, he feared, curdled into something ugly and cruel. And Nathaniel. His son's weakness was a constant source of disappointment. If he had allowed this to happen, he was not the man Richard had hoped to one day leave his empire to. When the jet touched down at Teterboro Airport, Alistair Finch was waiting on the tarmac beside the black sedan. He opened the door for Richard, his face an unreadable mask. "Well?" Richard asked as the car pulled silently away. Finch didn't waste words. He handed Richard a slim folder. "Mrs. Davies confirms your wife's account of the confrontation, but her personal observation was that Mrs. Sterling seemed distraught and genuinely confused, not guilty. She was forced to leave without any personal belongings. The security guards on duty confirm she was left on the main road in the middle of the storm. As for her location, she is currently staying with a friend, a Ms. Chloe Davis in Queens." He paused, letting the information sink in before delivering the final crucial piece. "And, sir, I had a trusted medical contact discreetly check with her OB-GYN. Isabella Sterling is indeed 16 weeks pregnant. The paternity was confirmed via a non-invasive prenatal test 6 weeks ago. The father is with 99.9% certainty your son." Richard Sterling closed his eyes. The quiet hum of the luxury car's engine was the only sound. He didn't rage. He didn't shout. A cold, terrifying calm settled over him. The lion had been sleeping content to let others manage his domain. But now he was awake, and he was hungry. "Change of destination, Alistair," he said, his voice like chips of ice. "We're not going to Greenwich. We're going to the city office. It's time to restructure the family." Richard Sterling's Manhattan office, occupying the entire top floor of the Sterling Tower, was a monument to power. It was sleek, minimalist, and offered a panoramic view of the city he had in many ways conquered. But Richard wasn't interested in the view. He sat behind his vast obsidian desk, the slim folder from Alistair Finch lying open before him. On his screen was the household audit he had requested. The numbers told a story of their own, a series of large, unusual payments to a private investigation firm he'd never heard of. Another substantial payment to a digital forensics specialist based out of a shady downtown office. It was a breadcrumb trail of deceit, and Genevieve hadn't been clever enough to hide it from a man who could financially dissect a corporation in his sleep. He summoned his son. Nathaniel arrived an hour later, looking flustered. He likely expected a debrief about the Tokyo trip, perhaps a perfunctory question about the unpleasantness with Isabella. He walked in with a practiced air of weary filial duty. "Father," he began, "welcome back. I trust the trip was successful." Richard didn't answer. He simply gestured to the chair opposite his desk. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably. "I imagine Mother filled you in on the situation with your pregnant wife." Richard interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. Nathaniel froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and gaunt under the office's cool lighting. I don't know what you mean. Don't you?" Richard slid one of the faked photographs across the desk. "Your mother presented you with these, I believe." Nathaniel nodded dumbly. Richard then slid a second piece of paper across the desk. It was the report from Alistair Finch, with a single line highlighted the confirmation of the positive prenatal paternity test. "And I assume you had seen this as well." "Weeks ago," Richard stated. It was not a question. Nathaniel's composure shattered. He slumped in his chair, a puppet with its strings cut. "Father, I can explain. Mother was so certain. The investigator. The pictures looked so real. She said Isabella was trying to trap us, that the baby might not even be mine." His voice trailed off into a pathetic mumble. The excuses of a child caught in a lie. Richard leaned forward, his grey eyes pinning his son in place. There was no anger in his voice, only a chilling, profound disappointment that was infinitely worse. She said the investigator said, "Do you have a mind of your own, Nathaniel, or is it merely a repository for your mother's ambitions and suspicions? Did you ask your wife? Did you look the woman carrying your child in the eye and give her the benefit of a single doubt?" "I was confused," Nathaniel whispered, his gaze fixed on the floor. "You were a coward," Richard corrected him, the words sharp as shards of glass. "You stood by while your mother, my wife, executed a character assassination of the most vulgar and cruel kind. You let her throw your pregnant wife out of her home with nothing. Not a phone to call for help, not $1 for a cab. In a storm. Is that the kind of man you are? Is that the leader I'm supposed to entrust a global enterprise to a man who cannot even manage the affairs of his own house with a shred of decency or courage?" Every word was a hammer blow to Nathaniel's already crumbling ego. He had no defense. There was nothing to say. Richard leaned back, his decision made. "This is what happens now. You will be suspended from your duties as COO effective immediately. Your corporate accounts will be frozen. Your access to the company jet and vehicles is revoked. You will vacate the Greenwich house by the end of the day. You can stay at the city apartment for now. We will speak again when I decide you've remembered what it means to be a man." "Father, no," Nathaniel pleaded, jolted into action. "The board, my reputation. You should have thought of your reputation when you abdicated your role as a husband and a father," Richard retorted coldly. "Get out of my office." Defeated Nathaniel rose and walked out. His shoulders slumped. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Richard alone once more. He took no pleasure in his son's humiliation, only a deep, weary sadness. The boy was broken molded by Genevieve into a weak-willed accessory for her social climbing. Now for the Queen herself. He returned to the Greenwich estate that evening. The house felt different, tainted. Genevieve was in the drawing room, arranging flowers, humming softly to herself. She had re-established her domain. Standing near the fireplace, looking perfectly at home, was a striking brunette woman whom Richard vaguely recognized from society pages. "Richard, darling, you're home," Genevieve greeted him, smiling brightly. "You remember Victoria Vance, don't you?" She was just stopping by to offer her support to Nathaniel. "Such a dear." Victoria offered a polite, predatory smile. "Mr. Sterling, it's a pleasure to see you again. I was just telling Genevieve how sorry I was to hear of Nathaniel's troubles." Richard ignored her completely. His gaze was locked on his wife. "Miss Vance, if you'll excuse us, I need to speak with my wife privately." His tone left no room for argument. Victoria Vance, sensing the shift in temperature, quickly made her excuses and departed. The moment she was gone, Genevieve's smile faltered. "Richard, what's wrong? You're being rude." "Save it, Genevieve," he said, his voice flat. He tossed the folder from Finch onto the coffee table, right where the faked photos had been. "It's all in there. The payments to the PI, the digital artist you hired, the lies you told me, the lies you told our son." Genevieve's face turned ashen. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "But I think what disgusts me most," Richard continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is that you knew she was pregnant. You knew, and you did it anyway. You were willing to orphan my grandchild before he was even born, all for what? To replace a daughter-in-law you deemed unsuitable with that vacuous socialite who just left to preserve your pathetic illusion of a perfect bloodline." He walked over to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured gardens. "You have mistaken my delegation for apathy for far too long, Genevieve. You have managed my homes, but you do not manage my family. You do not dictate my legacy. And you most certainly do not threaten my blood. I did it for us, for this family." She finally choked out, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "She was an outsider, a nobody. She wasn't right for us. You did it for you." Richard corrected her, turning back to face her. His expression was utterly devoid of warmth. "And in doing so, you have fractured this family in a way you cannot possibly comprehend. You have shown me a capacity for cruelty I can no longer abide under my roof. I will be meeting with my lawyers tomorrow. This marriage, as far as I am concerned, is over." The finality in his voice was absolute. Genevieve Sterling, the untouchable queen of society, the matriarch of the Sterling dynasty, finally understood. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had picked a fight with the one person in her world who had the power to take everything away from her, and she had lost. Richard Sterling's revenge was never going to be a loud theatrical affair. He was a man who moved markets, with a quiet phone call, who dismantled competitors with surgical precision. Not a sledgehammer. His retribution against his wife and son would be conducted with the same cold, calculating efficiency. It would be a symphony of consequences orchestrated by a master conductor. His first and most important move was to find Isabella. Chloe Davis's fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria was an unlikely setting for a meeting with a billionaire. When the buzzer rang, Chloe answered with her usual suspicion. "Who is it?" "My name is Richard Sterling." The voice came through the intercom, calm and measured. "I am Isabella's father-in-law. I would like to speak with her. I'm alone, and I come in peace." Chloe and Isabella exchanged a wide-eyed, panicked look. Chloe's protective instincts flared. "Not a chance, buddy. You people have done enough." "Please," the voice said, and for the first time a note of something other than command crept in. It sounded like regret. "I know what my wife and son have done. I am here to make it right. For her, and for my grandchild." Isabella, who had been listening with a hand on her stomach, made a decision. "Let him in, Chloe." Chloe hesitated, then buzzed him up, standing by the door, with her arms crossed, ready for a fight. When Richard Sterling appeared at the doorway, he looked smaller than he did in photographs, and infinitely more tired. He wore a simple grey suit, no tie. He looked at the small, cluttered apartment, then at Isabella, who was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in Chloe's fleece blanket. His gaze was filled with a deep, unmistakable remorse. "Isabella," he said, his voice quiet. "I don't have the words to properly express how sorry I am for the actions of my family. What was done to you was monstrous and unforgivable." He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to explain away Genevieve's or Nathaniel's behavior. He owned it. "I have come here today for 2 reasons," he continued, remaining in the doorway, giving her space. "First, to offer you my sincerest apology, and second, to offer you my unconditional and absolute support in whatever form you choose to accept it." Isabella studied him. She had seen him as a distant, powerful figure, an extension of the cold, Sterling empire. Now she saw a man grappling with a profound failure within his own family. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why now?" "Because I just found out the truth," he said simply. "And because you are the mother of my grandchild. That makes you family. My family. And I do not abandon my family." Over the next hour, he laid out the facts. He told her what he had discovered, how he had confronted Nathaniel, and his intentions regarding Genevieve. He wasn't asking her to come back to the mansion or to forgive his son. He was offering her resources. "I have already opened a trust in your name and a separate one for the child. You will never have to worry about money again," he explained. "I have the best medical team on standby for you. I have located a beautiful brownstone in Park Slope that I would like to purchase for you and the baby, if you like it. And I have retained the services of the most formidable divorce attorney in New York City on your behalf. You will dictate the terms. Nathaniel will comply." Isabella was stunned into silence. This wasn't what she expected. She had been steeling herself for a fight, a long, ugly battle for legitimacy for her child. Instead, she was being handed an arsenal. "I don't want your money, Richard," she said, finding her voice. He nodded, understanding. "I know. This isn't about the money. It's about security. It's about justice, but I ask you to accept it, not as a handout, but as the first of many reparations that are owed to you. Use it to build a life for yourself and my grandchild, a life far away from the poison of my house." She looked at Chloe, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. This was real. This was power being handed back to her. On one condition, Isabella said, her spine straightening. This isn't just about me. Genevieve and Nathaniel can't just get away with a slap on the wrist. People need to know what they did. A grim smile touched Richard's lips. I assure you their consequences are just beginning. He was true to his word. The very next day, the second phase of his plan went into effect, the financial and social annihilation. An internal memo at Sterling Global announced that Nathaniel Sterling was taking an indefinite leave of absence for personal reasons, effective immediately. His name was removed from the company letterhead. His corporate credit cards were declined at a 5-star restaurant where he was trying to have lunch with a stunned Victoria Vance. Humiliation was the opening salvo. For Genevieve, the attack was more subtle and far more devastating. Richard didn't need a tabloid. He had a more powerful weapon. He was a major benefactor to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the New York Philharmonic, and a dozen other high society charities where Genevieve held prestigious board positions. He made a series of quiet calls. He didn't issue threats. He simply expressed his deep disappointment in his wife's recent ethical lapses, and suggested that her continued presence on these boards might compromise their integrity and, by extension, future Sterling donations. The effect was instantaneous. One by one, the calls came in. The chair of the museum board reluctantly accepted her resignation. The head of the Philharmonic Gala committee suggested she might want to sit this season out. Her social circle, a fragile ecosystem built on power and proximity to wealth, evaporated overnight. Friends who had fawned over her for years suddenly didn't return her calls. She was being erased from the world she had so meticulously built. Isabella, meanwhile, was moving into the beautiful sun-drenched brownstone in Brooklyn. It was a home, not a showroom. It had a small garden in the back, perfect for a child. With the resources Richard had provided and Chloe's encouragement, she began to lay the groundwork for a small art consultancy firm specializing in private acquisitions. She was reclaiming her identity, not as Mrs. Sterling, but as Isabella Rossi. She had agreed to let Richard's lawyers handle the divorce. She didn't want a war. She wanted a swift, clean amputation. But she had made one thing clear to them: Nathaniel would have no automatic parental rights. He would have to earn them. Richard Sterling had not only given her a shield, he had handed her a sword, and as she stood in the empty room that would become her baby's nursery, feeling the first real kick from within, she knew she was ready to use it. The age of being a victim was over. The fallout was as swift as it was brutal. The world that Genevieve and Nathaniel Sterling had inhabited didn't crumble. It vanished like a mirage in the desert. Nathaniel's descent was the most pathetic. Stripped of his title, his expense account, and his father's approval, he was a ghost haunting the edges of a life he no longer owned. His fair-weather friends, the ones who had clapped him on the back at exclusive clubs and laughed at his mediocre jokes, now looked right through him. He was no longer the heir apparent. He was just a man in a borrowed suit. The final predictable blow came from Victoria Vance. She had attached herself to the COO of Sterling Global, a man with a limitless trust fund and a direct line to one of the world's great fortunes. What she was left with was a suspended employee living in a company-owned apartment. She met him for one last drink at a bar in the West Village, far from their usual haunts. "I just think we need some space, Nate," she said, stirring her cocktail with a perfectly manicured finger. "This is all just so messy. I have my own reputation to consider." Reputation. Nathaniel scoffed a bitter, unfamiliar sound. "You mean your prospects? My father cut me off Victoria. The money's gone." Her mask of feigned sympathy dropped, replaced by a cold, appraising look. "Well," she said, standing and smoothing her dress. "That is a shame. I hope you sort things out." She didn't look back as she walked out of the bar, leaving him alone with the bill. He wasn't sure he could pay. Her departure was the final confirmation of his irrelevance. He wasn't a person to her. He was a position, and the position was now vacant. Genevieve's isolation was more profound, a chilling portrait of poetic justice. She was trapped in the 30,000-square-foot Greenwich mansion, a queen reigning over an empty kingdom. The household staff, loyal to the man who signed their paychecks, treated her with a frigid, correct politeness that was more unnerving than open hostility. The silence in the vast hallways was deafening, broken only by the ticking of antique clocks counting down the moments of her gilded imprisonment. Her phone, once a constant source of invitations and gossip, remained silent. Her charities had disavowed her. Her social rivals whispered about her downfall with schadenfreude over lunch at St. Ambrose. They said she'd finally gone too far, that her cruelty had caught up with her. She had built her entire identity on the foundation of the sterling name and its accompanying social power. With Richard's support withdrawn, she discovered her identity was as hollow as a Faberge egg, beautiful on the outside, but empty within. The final confrontation with Richard took place in the very drawing room where she had condemned Isabella. He didn't come to argue. He came with his lawyer to deliver the terms of their separation. "You can keep the house," Richard said, his tone devoid of any emotion, "and I will provide you with an allowance sufficient to live comfortably. But you will be cut off from all sterling corporate assets. Your name will be removed from all family trusts. You will sign this post-nuptial agreement, which includes an ironclad non-disclosure clause regarding all family and business matters, or the allowance will be rescinded and I will sell the house." "You can't do this to me, Richard," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "After 40 years of marriage, I built this life with you. No," Richard replied, his gaze unwavering. "I built an empire. You decorated it, and you allowed your vanity to threaten its future. You threatened my grandchild. That is a line you do not cross. This is not a negotiation, Genevieve. It is a statement of fact." He stood to leave. "The papers will be filed tomorrow. Your lawyers can speak to mine." As he walked away, Genevieve finally broke. Her carefully constructed facade shattered, and she let out a raw, guttural sob of rage and despair. She had played the game of social chess her entire life, and she had just been checkmated by the one piece on the board she always took for granted. While their world imploded, Isabella's was being built brick by brick on a new and solid foundation. The Park Slope brownstone was filled with light and life. Chloe was a constant supportive presence, helping her pick out furniture and paint colors for the nursery. Isabella's art advisory was no longer just an idea. It had a name, a business license, and its first client, a tech mogul Richard had discreetly referred to her. She was rediscovering the woman she was before she became Mrs. Sterling. She spent her days in museums and galleries, her mind sharp and engaged. The work gave her purpose, a sense of self-worth that had nothing to do with a famous last name. She met with her obstetrician regularly, no longer in the sterile, high-end clinic Genevieve had insisted upon, but with a warm, caring doctor in Brooklyn who spoke to her as a person, not a vessel for a dynasty. Her meetings with her divorce lawyer were brief and businesslike. She didn't ask for a punitive settlement. The trusts Richard had established were more than enough. Her only demands were non-negotiable, full legal and physical custody of her child. Nathaniel could petition for visitation rights after the birth, but they would be at her discretion and would be supervised until he could prove he was a stable and positive influence. It was not an act of revenge, but of protection. She was a mother bear guarding her cub. One crisp autumn afternoon, sitting in the half-finished nursery and watching the leaves fall in her small garden, Isabella felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She was free. The pain of Nathaniel's betrayal still lingered, a dull ache in her heart. But it was no longer the defining feature of her existence. It was a scar, not an open wound. The symphony of consequences that Richard had orchestrated had provided a stark and satisfying justice, but her real victory wasn't their downfall. It was her own ascent. She was building a life of her own making for herself and for the child who would soon fill it with a new kind of music. Winter thawed into a vibrant New York spring. 6 months after she had walked out of the Sterling mansion into the pouring rain, Isabella Rossi walked out of a Brooklyn hospital into the brilliant sunshine, cradling her newborn son, Leo Rossi. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair like hers, and she thought with a pang she quickly dismissed his father's blue eyes. But his name was hers. He would be raised on her terms, defined by her strength, not by the tarnished legacy of his father's family. Waiting for her at the curb was not a chauffeur-driven limousine, but Richard Sterling himself, driving a discreet but comfortable SUV. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, but there was a light in them she had never seen before. When he saw Leo, his formidable composure melted away, replaced by the unabashed, foolish grin of a new grandfather. "He's a Sterling, all right," Richard said softly, his voice thick with emotion as he gently touched the baby's cheek. "He has that determined look." "He's a Rossi," Isabella corrected him gently but with a smile. "But I suppose he can have a little Sterling determination." Their relationship had transformed into something remarkable and unexpected. He was a constant, steady presence in her life. He never offered unsolicited advice, never overstepped. He was simply there, a source of quiet support, a guardian angel in a bespoke suit. He had become the father she never had, and in her and Leo, he had found a new purpose beyond the boardroom, a chance to build a family legacy based on love and respect, rather than power and fear. The divorce from Nathaniel was finalized with a quiet signature. There were no headlines, no messy court battles. Richard's power had ensured it. Nathaniel, humbled and forced into therapy by his father as a condition of receiving a modest living stipend, had begun the long, arduous process of self-reflection. A few weeks after Leo's birth, he called Isabella. "I know I have no right to ask for anything," he said, his voice stripped of its old, easy arrogance. "But I was hoping. I would like to see my son." Isabella took a deep breath. "The first visit will be at my house. Your father will be here. You can stay for 1 hour. And, Nathaniel, this is not for you. It's for Leo. He deserves the chance to know his father, but he also deserves to be protected. You will have to earn his trust, and you will have to earn mine." It was a start. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a path forward. She would never allow the toxicity of the past to poison her son's future, but she also wouldn't let her own pain deny Leo a relationship with his father, should Nathaniel prove himself worthy of one. Genevieve Sterling remained a ghost in her Greenwich palace. The divorce had left her a wealthy woman, but a profoundly impoverished one. She was adrift in a sea of empty rooms and bitter regrets. The society she worshipped had exiled her, and her son, whom she had tried to control, now barely spoke to her, blaming her for his downfall. She had won her battle against Isabella, but in doing so had lost the entire war, sacrificing her son's happiness, her marriage, and her place in the world for the sake of a pride that now tasted like ash in her mouth. Life in the Park Slope brownstone was full. It was a place of warmth, laughter, and the scent of baby powder. Chloe was a fixture the proudest of aunts, showering Leo with books and affection. Richard visited every Sunday for what he called board meetings with the CEO, which consisted of him holding Leo and making quiet, happy noises. One sunny afternoon, Isabella was in the garden rocking Leo in her arms. Richard was there watching them with a peaceful expression. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "for decades I thought building a legacy was about steel and concrete stock prices and market share. I spent my life acquiring things." He looked at Leo sleeping soundly in Isabella's arms. "I was wrong. This," he said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence, "this is a foundation. Everything else is just scaffolding." Isabella looked down at her son, her heart swelling with a fierce protective love. The storm had passed. The ruins of her old life were far behind her. Here in this small garden, with her child in her arms and an unlikely ally by her side, she had not just survived. She had built something new, something stronger and more real than any gilded cage. A home, a family, a future, and it was all hers. That's the incredible journey of Isabella Rossi, a story that proves that true power isn't about wealth or a famous last name, but about resilience, integrity, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. She was cast out and betrayed, left with nothing, but she found her strength not in revenge, but in building a new life on her own terms. She turned a devastating betrayal into a story of empowerment and created a new kind of family founded on love and respect. What do you think about Richard's form of justice? Was it too harsh, or exactly what Genevieve and Nathaniel deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and resilience resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas where the truth always finds its way to the light. Thanks for listening.